The Spectre Bridegroom, Chapter 1. The Odenwald is a wild part of Upper Germany. Long ago, Baron von Landshort had his castle there on the top of a mountain. The Baron came from the great family of Kutzenlebogen. The family had lost a lot of its land and most of its riches in wars, but Baron von Landshort tried to keep alive some of the old show. He also kept alive all the old family quarrels. He wouldn't speak to some of the people who lived nearest to him. The quarrel had often started between their great grandfathers over some small trouble. Baron von Landshort had only one child, a daughter. But when people have only one child, it is always wonderful. And so the Baron's daughter was wonderful, of course. All the older women told her father that no girl in Germany was so beautiful and who could know better than they. She was not only beautiful, she had two unmarried aunts who had spent a few years, when they were young, at one of the little German courts. Because of that, they knew everything that a girl must learn in order to become a fine lady. They taught the Baron's daughter with great care. By the time she was 18, she could read without great difficulty. She had even read several church legends and almost all the stories of the old German heroes in the Book of Heroes. She had learnt to write, and she could write her own name without mistakes, and so clearly that her aunts could read it without glasses. The two aunts had once loved dancing and fun in the company of young gentlemen. So, of course, they were the best people in the world to take care of a young lady and keep her away from young gentlemen. The result was that the Baron's daughter grew up like a lovely flower in a walled garden. Young men never saw her, and she never saw young men. It is true that Baron von Landshort had only one daughter, but his family was certainly not small. He had very large number of poor relations, like poor relations everywhere. They were very fond of the Baron. As often as they could, they came to show their love for him. The Baron enjoyed these family gatherings. They gave him a chance to tell long stories about the family heroes and about the ghosts that filled that part of Germany. The poor relations listened to every one of his stories with open eyes and mouths, even if they had heard them 99 times before. This made the Baron very happy. He was the king of his dinner table, and he felt very wise. Chapter 2. At the time of our story, there was a great family gathering at the castle. The poor relations had come to see the marriage of the Baron's daughter. The marriage had been arranged by the bride's father and the bridegroom's father. The bridegroom's father was the head of a fine old Bavarian family. The bride and bridegroom had never seen each other, though their fathers had even fixed the day for the marriage. The bridegroom, the young Count von Altenburg, was on his way to the Baron's castle, though he had sent a letter from Würzburg to say that he would be a few days late. The letter did not say that he had met a friend in Würzburg, Hermann von Starkenforst. The two young men had been together in the army, and they had a lot to talk about. They were going the same way because Hermann von Starkenforst's home was not far from Baron von Landshort's castle, so they decided to start off together early in the morning. The Count gave orders for his followers to start when they were ready and catch him up. Hermann von Starkenforst had never seen Baron von Landshort's daughter because of an old quarrel between his family and the von Landshorts. The Count had not seen her either, as you know, but he had heard a lot about her, her beauty and her cleverness. So he talked endlessly to Hermann von Starkenforst about her. The young men were riding through a thick forest in a valley of Odenwald when they were attacked by a band of robbers. The two friends fought bravely, but they were nearly beaten when the Count's followers appeared and the robbers escaped into the forest. But the young Count von Altenburg had been very seriously wounded. They carried him back to the city of Wurzburg, but the doctors could not save him. "Hermann," he said with his dying breath, "I want you to go at once to the castle of Landshort. Tell them that I am sorry I couldn't come to my bride, and tell them why. It's very important to me, and you must promise me, a dying man, that you will go." Of course Hermann von Starkenforst promised. It would not be easy to go to the castle of an enemy, but a man's dying wish must be obeyed. And besides, there was something very interesting about a girl nobody had seen. Chapter 3. We must now go back to the castle of Landshort, where all the family were impatient for the arrival of the bridegroom, and even more impatient for their dinner. The two unmarried aunts had tried all day to see that the lovely bride was looking her best. They had quarrelled about every piece of the bride's clothes and jewels, so the bride had been able to please herself while the aunts were quarrelling. And the result was truly beautiful. Night fell, and the bridegroom had not arrived. The food was becoming overcooked, and the cook was nearly out of his mind. At last the Baron had to give the order of the meal to start. The poor relations had all taken their places at the table when the doorman shouted that someone had arrived at the castle gate. The Baron himself hurried to meet the bridegroom. He was a tall, fine-looking man on a black horse. Baron von Landshort was surprised to see him alone, with no followers, but he supposed that impatience had made him ride the black horse faster than his followers could travel. "I'm sorry," said the stranger, "to come at this time." The Baron's outpouring of words, how glad he was to see his fine visitor, how happy the visitor would make the Landshort family, how he hoped the journey had not been too tiring, made it impossible for the stranger to continue. He tried once or twice to speak, but there was no way of stopping the Baron. By the time the Baron did speak, for a moment to breathe, they were inside the castle. The stranger was just going to say something when the two aunts appeared leading in the bride. The stranger was quite unable to speak. Her lovely face and shape seemed to silence him, and to draw his heart out through his eyes. The beautiful girl tried to say something. Her eyes met his for only a very short moment. Then she looked down again. No words came, but there was a very sweet smile in the eyes that looked at the floor. Did the smile mean that what she had seen in the one quick look had not been unpleasing? The Baron had started talking again as he led the visitor into the great hall where the dinner was ready. He went on talking as she showed the visitor where to sit next to the beautiful bride. The stranger did not seem to eat much or even to look at the food. All his interest seemed to be in the bride. He spoke to her in a voice so low that nobody else could hear his words, but there was a mixture of gentleness and seriousness in his way of looking at her that seemed to bring the color to her face. And several times when his eyes was turned away for a moment, she took a quick look at his fine face and breathed happily. It was clear that the two were deeply in love. The aunts, who fully understood everything about the heart, knew that it was a clear case of love at first sight. The meal went on, the poor relations ate well, and the Baron told his best and longest stories. All the relations held their breath at the exciting parts and laughed at the funny parts. But the stranger did not laugh. He became more and more serious, and whatever he and the bride were saying to each other became more mysterious. The Baron was just ending a frightening ghost story when the stranger stood up. Very sadly he said good-bye to the family. The Baron did not know what to think. "You aren't going to leave the castle at this time of night," he said to the stranger. "There's a bed ready for you here if you need to rest." The stranger shook his head sadly and mysteriously. "I must lay my head in a different resting place tonight," and appearing taller than ever, he walked out to where his black horse was waiting for him. The Baron had followed him and was still trying to make him stay. "I cannot stay," said the stranger. "Now that we are alone, I will tell you the reason. I have to be in Woodsburg." "Can't you send somebody else?" asked the Baron. "No, I must be there myself. I must go to the great church in the Woodsburg." "Ah," said the Baron, "but you don't need to go there tonight. Tomorrow you can take your bride there." "No, no, I'm not going there to be married. I'm going there to be buried. I'm a dead man killed by robbers. My body lies at Woodsburg, and at first light in the morning I am to be buried." And he rode away into the night. The Baron went back into the hall and told the family what had happened. Nobody knew what to believe, but the next morning letters arrived. It was true. The young Count had been killed by robbers. His body was to be buried at first light in Woodsburg. Chapter 4. The Baron shut himself up in his room. The poor relations could not leave him in his unhappiness, of course. They stood in small groups between meals and shook their heads and talked seriously. And they ate and drank a lot in the hall, so that they would be strong enough to help him. They did not see the bride. She never came out of her room. On the second night the bride was in bed. The aunt whose turn it was to stay in the room with her had just finished telling a long ghost story and had fallen asleep. Suddenly there was a sound of music coming from the garden outside the bride's window. The bride got up quickly, almost as if she had expected it, and moved very quickly to the window. A tall shape stood among the shadows of the trees. At that moment the moonlight fell on the face of the Spectre Bridegroom. With a loud cry the aunt fell into the bride's arm. She had been woken by the music and had followed the young lady to the window. By the time the aunt had opened her eyes again the Spectre Bridegroom was not to be seen. The aunt made it clear that she would never sleep in that room again. The girl for once would not listen to orders to sleep anywhere else, so she had to sleep in her own room alone. But she did not get her aunt to promise to say anything about it. Surprisingly, the aunt kept her promise for 3 whole days. And then a servant came running. The bride's room was empty. The bed had not been slept in. The windows was open. The aunt cried out, "The spectre! The spectre!" and told her story. Men were sent out to ride in groups through every valley of the Odenwald. The Baron himself had just taken his sword and was getting ready to ride out, when a lady was seen coming towards the castle on a beautiful little horse with, at her side, a fine horseman richly clothed. The lady rode quickly to the castle, got off her horse, and ran to the Baron. It was his lost daughter, and with her the Spectre Bridegroom. The mystery was soon cleared up. The horseman, you knew all the time he was not a spectre, made himself known as Sir Hermann von Starkenforst. He told about the death of the young count. He spoke about hurrying to the castle with the count's last words, but not being able to give his sad news because the baron was such a good speaker. "I fell so deeply and so immediately in love with your daughter," he said, "that I let the mistake about me continue, so that I could be near her. Your wonderful ghost story gave me the thought of how I could leave the castle. I was afraid that as an enemy of the family you would not allow me to come back, so I came to the garden below my dear one's window. I told her I loved her." "And I told him I loved him," said the bride. "So we went away and we were married. And I have come to ask you to forgive me, father." Matters were happily arranged. The baron forgave the two young people immediately. The party at the castle began again. The poor relations were full of joy at the baron's food and drink. They loved the young man who had been added to the family. He was so good looking, so kind, and so rich. The aunts, it is true, were not quite pleased to see the results of their care of the baron's daughter, but they blamed themselves. They ought to have had bars put over the windows. One of the aunts was sorry that her best story was spoiled. that the only ghost she had ever seen was not really a ghost, but the bride seemed to be very happy to find that her bridegroom was not a ghost at all.